Hey guys, it's Mitch here. Today I'm gonna teach you how to play Ice Ice Baby or Under Pressure. Could you tell the difference between the two songs at the beginning? The first one I played was Under Pressure. It goes like this. So that's Under Pressure. This is Ice Ice Baby. So they're very, very similar. Can you notice the difference? The difference is that Ice Ice Baby has one little extra pickup in it. A pickup is a note that starts at the end of a measure but is part of the phrase in the next measure. So Ice Ice Baby goes da 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 da. Here's the pickup, da 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 da, just like that. And Under Pressure just keeps the but no matter what the song, they're both really, really easy to play for beginners, and it's a great thing to start out with to learn your picking skills, to getting your down-up alternate picking motion going, and just switching between strings. Only uses open strings for this part, okay? Before we get into the lesson and I tell you what those strings are, check out the description below to sign up for my newsletters. Click subscribe below also for new videos coming out. I'm going to have a lot of beginner videos coming out, playing everything from modern songs to songs from the 80s, 70s. I'm kind of going to do some theme weeks where I stick to one decade. And I'm going to have the real versions of those songs and a way to simplify it for beginners for almost all of the songs that I can do that. I'm also going to have a video coming out with the top 5 riffs that a beginner can learn right now. Alright, so with that said, let's get into the lesson. So all we're going to do is we're going to use 2 strings for this one. So we're going to do the D string and the A string. Alright, so they're right beside each other, so you shouldn't have too hard of a time switching between the two. So we're going to go D, 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 A, D, 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 A. So let's try that together. 1, 2, ready, go. D, 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 A. 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 And that's all you've got to do if you want to play the Queen song Under Pressure. If you want to play Ice Ice Baby, and you can play both of these along with the real track. If you want to play Ice Ice Baby, we're just going to add that pickup note in. So here's Ice Ice Baby. D, 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 A. D, 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 A. D, 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 A. D, 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 A. Alright, so that's basically it, guys. If you enjoyed this video, then click subscribe below. Leave any songs that you'd love for me to do in the comments below, and I promise I'll get those up to you. I'm also going to do a chord version of Under Pressure, so I'm going to add a little bit more to the Under Pressure part. For Ice Ice Baby, that's pretty much it. The majority of the song after that is pretty much the same. So let's do it one more time before we go. Ready, go. D, 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 A. D, 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 A. That's Ice Ice Baby. And then Under Pressure. D, 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 A. D, 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 A. Alright guys, See you next time. Like I said, click subscribe below. Sign up for my newsletter in the description. And also the description will show you all of the things I have coming up soon. See you next time.